Hi, my name is Vasilisa and this is not a channel about cats. Welcome to BrainCan channel, the channel about brain research. Thank you for watching. I'm pretty sure that you have met a lot of different information about creativity. How to boost your creativity, how to become a creative person. But have you ever heard that creativity and ability to share your creative experience with others is a unique feature of all humans? And possibly this is what differentiates us from other animals. Possibly creativity made us humans. Today, we will talk about sources of creativity and its opportunities with a Mexican neuropsychiatrist, Dr. Jesus Ramirez-Bermudez. He has already published 5 great books about different aspects of human soul, and today we will talk about creativity with a very creative neuropsychiatrist. When I started to do some research about creativity, I found that actually people have some debates about animals and humans. So the main question is like, this ability to create, is it unique for humans or other animals can be creative too? And I found some reviews, scientific reviews, and it was said that animals can actually come up with some ideas and some behavior to adapt their behavior actually to some new environment and some new conditions. But the difference also exists, and some researchers call this already creative behavior. But also some people who study creativity in humans argue about it, and they have such arguments like it cannot be considered as creativity and creation because they don't keep the same pattern of behavior among other individuals of their group, among their species, for example, and they cannot transfer this new behavioral patterns to their offspring and so on. And humans actually can do so. So like painters can come up with some ideas of making something, and then they can spread this knowledge, and new generation of painters can adapt to these skills, these approaches, and develop it. And the first question, and then people call it a creativity and call it as a unique property of humans. So my question for you is, how do you define creativity?
Okay, thanks a lot, Vasilisa. And I also enjoy that kind of questions that through which we ask ourselves about the possible continuity of experiences and behaviors going through the animal kingdom. No, from do we the, a way to express this question would be if we think there is a continuity, a behavioral continuity between other forms of lives and ourselves, or where and how do we set the specific boundaries for discontinuity in the case of humans as compared to other animals. So I regard other animal species as having goal directedness and spontaneous behavior. Of course, the behavioral patterns will be developed through learning, but even so, they will still have a sense of directedness, of goal directedness, and spontaneous behavior. So I think those are important principles that in the case of humans will take the form specifically of a creative behavior. A creative behavior that, of course, has specific forms in the arts, right? And
Yeah.
creative artistic activities. But also, I think that creative behavior is relevant for the understanding of science, of technology, and other human activities as well. No, even politics or
Yeah, I
other kind of
agree.
social
Absolutely. Yeah.
behaviors. No? So creativity is first of all a way of doing many different forms of human activity, but with some specific um, features, perhaps some specific patterns, some specific characteristics or variables that are involved in the behavior. So we can call it creative behavior. So perhaps the first one would be the capacity to bring something new into the picture of what exists already in the specific domain of the
Jesus,
person or the organism. Yes.
you mentioned that we can consider animals and animal behavior mostly like goal-directed behavior. Um, but if we talk about human creativity, um, does the creativity have its goal? Possibly the goal is to create something new. Like, let's speak about it. Why we cannot say that this is a goal-driven behavior, or we can.
I think that would be one of the points in which we can think of a continuity in a sense. There are also discontinuities. I will talk about that later, mainly because creativity in human beings is probably developed through symbolic systems, like the symbolic systems of language, mathematics, and so on. But going back to the continuity thesis, I would say that animals have goal directedness. I think this is may be even true for unicellular organisms, in which we can study the behavior of unicellular organisms that solve problems in their environment to pursue a goal, which may be the goal of survival, of course, but may also be the goal of foraging, finding some uh, some nutrients or keeping themselves alive, etc. But in the case of perhaps more complex animals that have already a brain, a nervous system, what we can see is that animals, they don't only respond to environmental stimuli, but they also transform their environment. This is very important. This is observed in a number of animals. I mean, I'm not an expert on animal behavior, to say the truth, but I have found many examples in different kinds of animals in which they definitively transform their environment. They can do it even so on an individual basis or on a group basis. So transforming your environment to pursue your own goals of survival, but not only survival, but also well-being, health, nutrition,
Mhm.
and so on, uh, implies a capacity for goal directedness that goes even beyond the immediate stimuli from the environment. But
Yeah, immediate needs. Yes, exactly.
exactly. So in a way, we can think, I mean, this can be debated, but we can think that the animals may have some kind of representation, a brain representation of a goal, of an objective of what they pursue in order to transform their environment in a way that is not already present, but that will be present after the behavioral effort has been done on an individual or a group basis. So I will take that principle uh, to
Mhm.
to to pose a continuity thesis in which humans are also from probably from the beginning, from the start, as long as anthropological studies can tell us that. they have been involved in the task of transforming their environments. And here I see also, I see like some principles that connect the field of the arts with the field of technology, because humans transform their environment to obtain, for instance, tools that can be used for different purposes of survival, right? I was hearing some days ago the example by Daniel Dennett, who unfortunately passed away recently, in which he was saying that some behavioral cycles, for instance, an ancient person, no, a man or a woman, perhaps is using a stick, and he is making some changes in the stick to behavioral cycles. So at a short time frame, it may look like he's doing nothing relevant, but at the end of the day, he obtained a tool that could be, for instance, a tool for a bow and arrow, for instance. No? So those behavioral cycles through can produce changes. At the beginning, the change may be partly random, but once the change is done, it can be learned through a process of mental representation, operant behavior, if you will, and then the person knows how to produce that change through a behavioral pattern and a behavioral effort. So once that is obtained, now the individual can repeat it and can make some improvements in the behavior, and probably he or she they can teach it. They can there can be a collective behavior of learning, which is very important. The process of learning through collective engagement in a similar pattern. So through this process of learning, of behavioral cycles that can produce initially random discoveries, but then artifacts. So through that process, we can go into changes in the environment that are not driven by the environment itself, but through the specific goals of the organism, the animal, or the person, but even through the specific goals of the group, because the group now has a dynamic that can also influence the change in the environment. For instance, these paintings, no, the old paintings in caves, for instance, no, they have apparently some sense of relatedness with ritual behaviors, and this is also related to the necessity of human beings to obtain a process of sense making, not only of sense making for survival in the behavior, but also a process of meaning making, of obtaining a sense of meaning that can help the community to adapt in difficult and changing environments, for instance, but also to give a sense of unity.
Once I prepared a lecture about music, and I found that people, mathematicians even, they investigated these caves, ancient caves, covered with these ancient pictures and images, and they found that ancient people, they didn't cover just random caves with images. They selected caves with the best acoustic properties. The better acoustic properties were, the more images that caves included. It means that they created a place not only for, visual stimuli and just with a visual, ethical, or possibly religious senses, but also they used these images to engage people with some auditory communication and some auditory stimulus. This is very important. And I wanted to say that possibly one act of art initiates in other acts of art. And I wanted to ask you, since creativity in humans is very different from this creative behavior in animals, in the broad meaning, we can say that animals can be creative, but we need to understand, based on your words, that these actions and these behaviors in animals and humans are very different. And I wanted to ask you, what does drive creativity in humans? So you mentioned engagement, and you mentioned that this creativity and acts of creation can be very random. But I think there are some other aspects.
Perhaps your example of music is useful in this sense, right? So in the first place, we can insist in the continuity thesis, no, that takes us down the path of an evolutionary formulation, in which some animals already have perhaps not music, but patterns of vocal activity, no, like birds, for instance, they have patterns of vocal activity that have already some purposes of communication that has some level of synchronization and some level of of attunement with the changes in the environment. So we will see that birds change their behavior in the morning or in the sunset, and this environmental changes can be stimuli, discriminant stimuli that may help us to understand why some behaviors start at some moment of the day. But then also the collective behavior will be relevant to understand why some patterns of behavior in these animals appear, right? So there's a purpose of communication. There are some purpose of group synchronization in these animals already. And I would dare to say that some of the musical, if I am allowed to use the metaphor, no, I am using the term metaphorically now, some musical patterns in these animals have some properties of creativity in the sense that they can be new patterns. I'm not perfectly sure of this, but as the animal is using this so-called musical, like vocal behaviors in a new way, in a new environment, with new partners there from their group, they can make some combination of some behavioral pattern that is new, probably. No, I don't know if someone has tracked specifically this problem, but this sense of spontaneity and variation can lead to some new sounds, no, produced by the animal. And once the
Exactly.
animal, please tell me.
Birds are very interesting in this case, and there are exceptions in many cases too. Because what I found about singing birds is that they can invent some new melodies, indeed, and also their success, reproductive success, depends on how complex and interesting these melodies can be. And researchers also investigated how they learn these melodies, and they found if birds growing up without their fathers, they produce much more primitive, simple melodies, and they were less successful among other female birds. It means that fathers, they teach their offspring with their very interesting melodies and musical approaches, if we can say so, right? And also among singing birds, the nightingales, for example, they are considered as birds with the most complex musical patterns, and they also have much more memory capacities than other singing birds. This is very important for intellectual abilities. But again, we also have other birds that are not singing birds, for example, ravens, and they are considered much more intellectually developed as nightingales, for example. It means that there are some other options how to develop your brain and intellect bypassing these musical patterns.
It's very important because we are then saying that through certain behavioral cycles and patterns, we can start to obtain some variations, and that these variations make for more complex patterns that can be learned and can be also teach to other members of the group. And that in this way, melodic and prosodic and musical patterns can be obtained in a creative way, uh, in the sense of obtaining new patterns that are meaningful for the group at the level of communication for the specific purposes of the group, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, probably in the case of humans, I will try to recover some of these principles to use it in the case of humans. No? So humans also have this, we inherited these systems for melodic and prosodic processes. In the first years of life, before the development of verbal language, babies will have prosodic and melodic patterns that go through repetition, then variation, and through variation, they become meaningful because they evoke specific responses in the mother or in others. So the purpose of communication and behavioral attunement and synchronization becomes relevant. So I think that in the case of music, for instance, we still have some of these fundamental patterns. That is the problem of behavioral synchronization. And I will even say that there is a process of synchronization at the level of experience, of conscious experience. For instance, the experience of feelings, one of the most important drives for music is expressing feelings, right?
Exactly. And the expression you've just mentioned, not only communication, not only in engagement into something, but also expression of your feelings, emotions, and so on. Yes, this is one of the most powerful drivers, I guess. But we went a bit aside from your books, actually. Your books are in Spanish, right?
Yes. Well, I have this book, which is called, in English, it would be The Creative Melancholia. It's about the old philosophical and clinical ideas of melancholy, but its relationship to creativity. So we're not so far away from the book, because one of the problems that I tried uh, to to explain in the book is the problem of what is the meaning of these creative patterns that we use specifically in the field of the narrative arts, because the book is mostly dedicated to literature, really to writing and creative writing mostly, but also the whole field of meaning making through narrative practices. That would be one of the topics of the book, and it has a lot to do with this, what that you were saying, that is the need to express some feelings, perhaps some feelings that the person has never felt before, because so this is one of the hypotheses in some specific psychological problems, psychopathological disorders, or perhaps even neuropsychiatric diseases, if you will. We can think that the person has some experiences that they have never felt before. Let's think of a person that experiences for the first time a state of depersonalization, for instance. No? So in a state of depersonalization, the person feels a loss of familiarity, a sense of strangeness in their environment, as if it was an unfamiliar environment. And they may even feel a sense of strangeness or lack of familiarity with themselves. So this may lead to an increased reflexivity about themselves and about the environment. But this phenomenological uh, features, these new features of experience, well, perhaps the person doesn't have any words to express these feelings. They don't have a dictionary that is already there in culture, so they can express this new state of being. So they need to use the resources of poetry, like, for instance, metaphors. And I don't mean only professional writers or poets, but even patients that don't have a literary goal in the clinic, they can start using metaphors or figures of speech in a sort of creative way, not completely, but only in the sense that they will use words in a strange way, in a metaphorical way, because they need to express these new feelings, these new perceptions, these new thoughts that they have never felt
They need
before.
to resolve this conflict, because the conflict that they experienced something that they have never felt before, and they are looking for words or for instruments to find and definitions of these new experiences, right? Can we say that this conflict can lead to the need of the expression?
Exactly. And then uh, these phenomenological states that are strange, that are new, that may be disturbing, or in another cases maybe feelings of joy, for instance, no, or happiness, but they are new, they are completely significant, and the person needs to express this. But the culture doesn't have already a dictionary to express those feelings, because the person uh, they are new experiences for them. So
Yes.
they can use the resources of poetry, they can use the resources of visual arts, of music, or other resources to express this in a new way. So it can take the form, for instance, of visual art, no,
Yeah.
of painting or music
To scout.
or
Yeah.
poetry.
Yeah.
But once that the person, through this process of repetition and variation, that can have sometimes some traits of obsessivity, perhaps, no, some creative obsessions through which the person is making a repetition of the pattern with slight variations until they obtain the pattern that that has the best trade-off to express the feeling. Now that they have that representation in a verbal text or in a musical product or in a visual uh, work, now that they have this representation, they can communicate their feeling. And most probably, other persons in the community, other persons that are having similar
Mhm.
feelings and that didn't
Mhm.
find the words to express them, they will say, well, this poem finally says what I am trying to say, or
Yes.
this work of art,
It
this music.
reflects. Yes, exactly.
So now we have a complete cycle of communication. First, the creative aspect of it, but then the recreation or the receptive part of it, which is equally important because, for instance, in the field of literature, no,
Mhm.
most writers want to communicate. Although in some extreme cases, like the case of Kafka, of course, no, he wrote all his works and then he died, and only after his death, this this magnificent literary works were known by
Mhm.
others, right? But even in those cases, we can think that perhaps the writer has like an imaginary um,
Audience.
other, no,
Yeah.
an imaginary other to that is in a way a person that we want to communicate with, no, and it can be an imaginary person. It can be a person that we left behind, no,
Yeah.
a past relationship, or someone who already died. It may be the case even that through literature, the person doesn't have an explicit representation of who is that person that to which he wants to communicate. But
Hmm.
there is already a goal directedness that is, in this case, the goal is perhaps the expression, the communication of something that I already don't know exactly what is that I want to say. So I need to write it down to, through this process of variation and discovery, to find the specific pattern that is finally meaningful. So I
Hmm.
will just finish this idea that in the case of humans, through symbolic languages, through symbolic systems, we we also want to change the environment, but perhaps mostly we want to change our social environment, a social environment that is filled with inequity, with poverty, with sources of abuse, of injustice. So the person that is making this creative work probably wants to bring about some differences in that social environment, and then they need to bring uh, a new form of sense making and a new form of meaning making. So the final goal is to create meaning, and this meaning is important for the person, the writer or the poet or the musician, but it's also important for others. So in this sense, it is truly creative in the sense that now the person has created a work of art that allows for a social change. It can be a social change between two persons only, or at a larger scale.
I have a quote from your book. We are the canvas of melancholy. Could you please comment?
In the history of melancholy, we find some important painters, but I will focus mostly on writers. No, so let's take like a very well known example. No, the case of Virginia Woolf, for instance. No, so
Okay.
you remember that she wrote this small essay that is called "On Being Ill." So in this small uh, essay, in this literary text, she tries to write down her experiences of being ill, and she does not explain if she means being mentally ill, like in the
Hmm.
case of melancholic depression. She probably suffered something like bipolar disorder. I don't like to give retrospective diagnosis, no, but she died
Yeah.
by suicide, as you know, and she specifically uh, made a depiction of some of her symptoms, including depressive states, including uh, these hallucinatory states. So perhaps she went through something that resembles psychotic depression. And she, in this literary text, she transmits the feeling of being ill, uh, in which when we feel ill, we don't know exactly if we feel mentally ill, because, for instance, a state of physical pain also brings about a state of mental feeling of mental pain also, right? Because
And always
we feel
chronic pain causes chronic depression. Yes, they are very linked to each other. Exactly.
exactly, and also in persons that have severe states of depression, have a lot of complaints of physical pain. So there's a strong relationship between physical pain and emotional pain or mental pain. And I will even bring another figure that comes from the research work of Naomi Eisenberger in UC. I think she's in
I don't
California.
know
Uh,
who is it actually.
oh,
I don't know who this person is. I'm sorry.
she's a fantastic researcher.
Oh,
Uh,
great.
the, she's a fantastic researcher, Naomi Eisenberger, and she has studied uh, a specific problem that she calls social pain, which is the emotional pain related to bereavement, to loss, to social disconnection, and this form of separation distress, like some
Mhm.
would call it, um, brings about some features of emotional pain that probably are one of the drives of specific forms of melancholic art, like some features of the art of Virginia Woolf. Or I would like to go through another example, no, the example of Gerard de Nerval, the famous
Mhm.
French poet who also died by suicide, and
Yeah.
he gave us this famous metaphor of the black sun of melancholy. No? So the metaphor of a black sun is very relevant for any of us to express these feelings.
Jesus, you mentioned a term social pain, you mentioned melancholy, and you mentioned depression. I always wanted to know how do these terms and phenomena they are related with each other. Is it synonyms?
The concept of social pain is more recent.
Mhm.
Myself, I read it in the research work of this neuroscientist, this female neuroscientist from the USA, I think from California, um, and in which
Mhm.
she studies the brain response to these problems of social pain. There are specific forms of emotional pain that appear in the context of social disconnection, so affective deprivation.
Mhm.
So this is a more recent concept that I think has a lot of heuristic power uh, to uh, to bring about some connection between the level of psychosocial risk factors and mental illness. But well, that is a more recent piece of research. Now, going through the concept of depression, the term depression,
Mhm.
initially it was mental depression or psychic depression. That word appeared approximately in the middle of the 19th century. In the
Oh,
middle of the
okay.
19th century, it was already in the medical dictionaries, and it was a term used in medicine to speak about cardiovascular depression and then respiratory depression, and in this sense, mental or psychic depression. But then the term was very successful, so it started using much more in the field of psychiatry in the late 19th century until it completely replaced the use of melancholy um, or melancholia that was used as a technical term in psychiatry along the 19th century.
Oh, interesting. Yep.
Yes, so you can open the books of Philippe Pinel, one of the fathers of psychiatry, and you will find chapters on melancholy, which was a technical term, mostly referring to persons that had uh, delusional states. It didn't have the meaning then
Mhm.
that it has now. It was a technical term to refer to people that have only one or two delusions, right? But the meaning of the term changed through the 19th century, and at the end of the 19th century, specifically in the works of Emil Kraepelin, we can see that the terms depression and melancholy are used for the same purposes with similar meanings. So, in his book on the depressive manic illness, Emil Kraepelin has a chapter on depressive states, and the depressive states appear there as, for instance, severe melancholia or melancholia gravis, uh, delusional melancholia, confusional melancholia. So these confusional or psychotic states of melancholy were the clinical forms of depression, of depressive states in the manic depressive illness. And then along the 20th century, depression was used as a term that began to specify states of depression, even without the other component, the component of mania. So
Mhm.
the the famous unipolar depression became independent in the nosology of psychiatry from the other bipolar disorder. So nowadays we have a unipolar disorder and a bipolar disorder. In both, we can have depressive states. And well, the taxonomy of depression became much more complicated because we have a depression as a syndrome, depression as a disorder, unipolar chronic depression, or depression in the context of bipolar disorder, and also depression in the context of neurological disease or general medical conditions.
And even more, depression became a very popular word. Now we started to use it as people used melancholy in past. So sometimes it's common to say like, I feel depressed today. And yes, and now we need to specify like the major depression, the pharmacologically resistant depression, the clinical depression, because the word depression became very popular. That's very interesting. But since we started to talk about neuropsychiatry, I wanted to ask, is it possible to use art in a therapy of depression?
Yes, I think there are many ways in which we can do this. Myself and my own
Mm-hmm.
neuropsychiatry unit with different people, like a Mexican writer Yolanda de la Torre and others. We have we have even published some books with patients on their creative writings after workshops of creative writing that we found very useful for these persons to start making like a process of sense making or meaning making related to their own identity, because sometimes in neuropsychiatric illness or in mental illness in the context of general psychiatry, patients go through through important changes in their sense of personal identity. So
Mm-hmm.
writing down their own thoughts and their own narratives about their personal identity was useful from my point of view for their recovery. And we made workshops on this, and we made even we published a book on this with the patients.
It's great.
But
Could you please
the,
mention a title of the book? I think it would
yeah,
be really great to
well,
know.
yeah, the title of the book in Spanish is Umbrales, and this is like a term that can be translated perhaps like boundaries or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
But let me look for the best
Restrictions.
word in it. Well, perhaps it could be translated as thresholds,
Oh,
thresholds,
yeah.
because because our patients are always going through of thresholds of function and dysfunction, thresholds of meaning and then the loss of meaning, thresholds of joy and then sadness. And through these thresholds, they, of course, they learn a lot and they can teach us a lot also, and they can contribute to this collective process of sense making, of creating culture, a culture not only a culture of sanity, of a culture of function, a culture of production, but also a culture of what does it feel like to be ill, a culture of what does it feel like to have a hallucination or a state of delusion, which are very delicate problems of human condition, right?
This is great that you mentioned this clearly, actually, that patients of psychiatric clinics can teach us all. I think this is very important to understand because these people often occur in situations of neglect, and social isolation. But actually, these people have to cope with such experiences of their life, and they're so strong that they can be a very important representatives for all of us. Yep. Thank you for this work with patients, and thank you for creating a very interesting book. Unfortunately, I don't know Spanish, but I'm looking forward to read your books in English. Could you please tell, is there any progress in translating your books into other languages?
Yes, fortunately, there's one translation underway of this other book. This book is called Un diccionario sin palabras, a dictionary without
Without
words.
words, yes. Let's
A
talk
dictionary,
about the book. Yeah.
a dictionary without words. Well, this was a book. Uh, a, let's say it's a book that I took many years of writing it down because it focuses on three cases. In this case, these are female patients that lost completely their language. They could not speak anymore. They had um, they had traumatic brain injury in two cases, and one case was a viral infection of the brain, a viral encephalitis. But the three of them lost completely all their capacities to understand language or to express language in any meaningful way. So they had to keep on with their lives without language. So to me, it was an important challenge as a writer because literature is made of words, right?
Exactly.
But what happens to a person when they lose completely the ability to use words? Can they still think in a rational manner? Can they have, for instance, can a person without words, can they lie? Can they have delusions? Can they make creative work? And all of these questions that I had, no, related to the problem of thought and language, the relationship between thought and language, that was very interesting for me at the moment, even at the philosophical side. Well, I thought that these patients could actually teach me a lot on to solve these problems, at least partially. Because, for instance, one of the cases, one of the patients, this woman, we found out that she could not speak in Spanish. She had learned English in London, but she could not speak in English either. But one day, her boyfriend put her favorite music in the car, and she started singing in English. So she could sing in English, but not in Spanish, and she could not speak nor in English nor in Spanish. So she could only sing in English. This was specifically the resource that she had, and through therapy, uh, rehabilitation process focused on singing, she eventually recovered completely in her linguistic capacities. No? It was a case in which I saw a brain lesion in the temporal and parietal cortex of the left hemisphere. So it was a completely neurological case. At the beginning, she would only speak with words that didn't exist, but she would use them fluently in a completely invented language.
Absolutely incredible. It's like Tolkien.
Yeah, and this was for months, months, not days, not weeks. It was for months. But then, like I would say, perhaps 1 year after the brain injury, she had recovered completely. But really, the key feature for this recovery was that the boyfriend discovered, and she discovered, the ability to sing in English. Now, the other case was of a woman who had been the victim of physical abuse, sexual abuse. She was a victim of poverty here in Mexico. So she came from a very marginal area of the city. And but she was really a survivor because even after the brain injury, she wouldn't stop in her attempts to recover. And we discovered that she could use mathematical signs perfectly, mathematical symbols. She could make calculations. Formerly, she was a salesperson, right?
Mm-hmm.
She would sell perfumes. So as she had this preservation in the ability to make calculations, we developed our rehabilitation program so she could start selling uh, popsicles, and she started selling popsicles in the street. You know,
Mm-hmm.
in the streets of Mexico, which are very busy, and you have the lights, no, the red light to signals to the cars to stop for 70 seconds, and in those 70 seconds, she would go and sell her popsicles with a written sign that she made with her mother that
Mm-hmm.
said that the popsicles uh, had the cost of 1 Mexican peso. No?
Mm-hmm.
So she could give the change. She could make the monetary exchange perfectly. So she started selling a lot of popsicles, and she even started winning more money, earning more money than the rest of her relatives. Even there was a time in which some cousins stole her money, you know?
Oh
And
my God,
also
yeah.
she had some behavioral problems, even moral problems, because sometimes she didn't want to pay. She would ask for some food, and she had the money, but she didn't want to pay for the food. So I found out that she was able to lie without words, because she would ask for the food and then she would not pay, even although she had the money and she knew exactly how much money she had.
Mm-hmm.
So I learned a lot of things about the human condition and about the human brain through the
Human
study
souls, I would
uh,
say.
uh, of these cases, no. And the cases take the different turns, no, narrative turns. So truly, the book is mostly like a novel, no, although it has no fiction in it. It's a novel, but without fiction, no, because I tried to be respectful of the facts, no, of the clinical facts. Of
Mm-hmm.
course, um, the confidentiality of the cases is kept, and they were able to give me their consent, you know, for writing this down. Most of the cases had a good outcome, but there were very difficult parts of the histories, no, that were very difficult for me also to write down. So in a sense, writing these books have forced me to go outside of the boundaries of medicine, of mainstream psychiatry, and into other fields of research, right? Through the humanities, through the arts, and through philosophy also as well. But I think this is one of the advantages of artistic work. So I would also recommend not only for patients, no, to use artistic resources, but also for psychiatrists, clinicians, neurologists, and so on, because we learn a lot about the human brain, but also about the human condition. And
The human
I,
soul, I wanted to say, because you even have a book that's
yeah,
called, yes, Brief Clinical Dictionary of Human Soul.
yes, it's this one,
Yeah.
the the brief clinical dictionary of the soul. Yes, I used that word because, as in the case of melancholy, I was interested not only in the modern age of psychiatry, no, that it's a 200 history, but also in the use of these words even before, no, even in mythological texts, like as you know, mythological texts from Greek culture or Chinese culture or my own pre-Hispanic
Mhm.
culture here in Mexico. They have a lot of teachings for us as well, that are related to these common features of human experiences, no.
And complexes. Like, it's not a coincidence that we have now terms of complexes that were borrowed from Greek mythology.
Of course, that was one of the tricks, right, by Sigmund
Yeah.
Freud, by using the resources of Greek mythology to make the case of some fundamental arrangements in human relationships. No, even if we reject or we accept the teachings from Sigmund Freud, I think we can accept that he was an excellent writer, a very imaginative man, using a lot of resources
Mm-hmm.
from the humanities and the arts. But it's not the only case. No, in fact, in these books, I have tried to track this what I call the clinical narratives. No, the tradition of clinical narratives. Perhaps a very well-known case is Oliver Sacks, but there are many others. No, and I think that through narratives we can see the connection between the level of mythology, the level of creative writing, fiction, and the level also of clinical writing. No? And establishing these connections, I think we have a gain in terms of meaning and knowledge that goes perhaps beyond the scientific and technical knowledge, but can still be very relevant for us to understand the other. No?
Of course, you neuropsychiatrists, you have a great advantage over other people and writers because you are psychiatrist, and psyche means a soul. So I think you know the human soul possibly even much better than other can imagine. And this is a really great that neuropsychiatrists like you, Jesus, started to share your experience, because this experience is very, I would say, dramatically valuable for all of us. Finally, we can sort out what actually influences on our behavior, on our feelings, on our experience, putting aside and leaving behind different stereotypes and cliches, because of the development of science. For example, I I have a very complicated relationship with psychology, because I think that some concepts are very helpful, I would say. Some concepts are not proven, so very complicated, I would say. But at some point, I understood that we actually owe to Christian philosophy and Christian religion, uh, because these people, like, and just Christian religion, I'm sorry, they emphasized that human soul has its own changes, transformations, and its own world, contrary to Greek mythology, because Greek um, thought that human soul mostly a product of other influences, even gods, even planets, and so on. Horoscope. I actually hate horoscopes. Yes. What do you think about it? How this understanding of a human soul did change during time? Is it true that psychology actually grew from Christian philosophy, or I'm wrong? I can be wrong, actually.
I agree with you that to understand, for instance, the human psyche, if we want to use that term, no, or
Yeah.
human psychology, and of course to understand the problems of mental illness or neuropsychiatric disease, whatever, we need a broader understanding of human experiences, behavior, and of course we need to go all the way back to philosophy. We need to understand spiritual traditions, of course.
Mhm.
We need to understand mythological thought. We need to go to the sacred texts from different cultures, no, because all those are sources to understand our sense of being, our our contemporary sense of being human, and I, I don't think we can detach our contemporary understanding of that from our cultural history. So we need to approach critically all those sources and learn from them everything that we can, right? So in this book specifically, in the clinical dictionary of the soul, I was committed. Of course, I am committed to scientific research as a principle, no, but I don't think that I should understand my fellow human beings, no, specifically
Mm-hmm.
my patients, only through the resources of science, although that is a very strong piece of knowledge, but also through other devices, like
And
the art,
another concepts,
the
because
humanities.
philosophy is a very rich with different concepts.
Of course, absolutely. Now, in the case of the old terms, the psyche, no, as we know, it was probably a metaphor that was used in Greek culture, and it's not perfectly clear what was the original meaning of it, but at least through Aristotle, we can say that it was used, and at least by some people in the Greek community, to speak about the activity of the body, the movement of the body. So it's like a way of speaking, not of a part of the body,
Mm-hmm.
not only about the thoughts or the feelings or the perceptions, but about the activity of the being as a whole, at the level of the agent.
Oh, very interesting. Can we say that they try to describe the initial impulse of your actions and movements?
Yes, because perhaps the observation was that when people died, the
Mm-hmm.
body was still there, but
Yeah.
it did not move anymore. So
Yeah.
the psyche was the movement,
Mm-hmm.
no, the movement. And so I would say that the psyche is the life, no? but it,
Yeah.
and it's is the movement of the living body, right? So to me, to say life or say psyche is basically the same, but psyche refers to the first person perspective, the subjective and the intersubjective perspective of life. Whereas if you are a biologist, you study life from a third person perspective and you speak about the bios. The bios of biology
Mm-hmm.
would be the other part of the psyche. So life would be, to me, the bios and the psyche. And those of us who are in the fields of psychology, psychiatry, neuropsychology, neuropsychiatry, and so on, we need to understand both parts of it, no? Like the
Yeah.
biological aspect, but also all the understanding that we can develop through the study of first person perspectives and also second person perspective, the dialogical perspective, no? And
Mm-hmm.
I think uh, to finalize and connect a little with the what we talked previously, I think that that level of communion, of communication, of attunement can be realized probably through narrative devices or through narrative practice or through artistic practices and through creative arts, because one of the interesting discoveries of recent neuroscientific work is that these creative devices, no, music,
Yeah.
uh, storytelling, and so on,
Painting. Yeah.
they can help us to synchronize or to attune at the level of subjectivity, so at the level of attentional behavior, at the level of conscious experience, but also at the level of body rhythms. The heart synchronizes, the brain synchronizes, even the electrical patterns of the skin synchronizes also between subjects, between persons, when we are attending to the same story or to the same music, or of
Concert, for
course
example. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
by dancing, of course, would be the
Yeah.
best case, the best case, right?
I have I have two last questions. I will try to be very short. Um, we didn't talk about one of your books. I think this the last book that we didn't discuss is Depression, the Darkest Night. And I wanted to ask you about this tendency to perfection, especially among creative people. Sometimes this call and this obsession about being perfect in your art and in your creation can lead to the major depression and even schizophrenia. So, what would you say about it? How to cope with this will to be perfect and still to be sane, you know? How to keep balance in this?
I guess it's not easy because I agree that one of the traits of many artists is um, this desire, this obsession, even for
Yeah.
perfection in the artistic forms, and in trying to convey the perfect relationship between form and content when you express a thought or a feeling, right? That is one of the principles behind poetry. For instance, if you write a sonnet, you have to make a perfect match between form and content. So writers and painters and musicians and other forms of artists become very perfectionist. I will tell you to answer this question a personal story. My father was a writer. He already passed away, unfortunately. But at one moment of his life, in which he was probably going through some sort of psychopathology, he was obsessed with writing this novel that was entitled in Spanish "Cerca del Fuego." So in English it would be like close to the fire or
Mhm.
near the fire, and he was obsessed with creating this like perfect work of art. So he wrote down 1,000 words by handwriting with uh, with a letter that was so small. The letters were so small that now we cannot even reconstruct the text
Mhm.
because it became smaller and smaller and smaller. So eventually he had even this like dystonic states of the arm,
Mhm.
uh, but being a writer, not a scientist, he thought it was like a symbol, no, like a Freudian symbol that the novel was wrong. So he stopped writing that novel. He already had wrote 1,000 pages, and he started writing another novel, no? A novel about a man and a woman, and she leaves the guy, no, but it is
Mhm.
a metaphor of his relationship to the novel, to the former novel that had went away. He could not capture that essence, no, that
Yeah.
aesthetic experience that he was trying to capture. So he wrote the second novel, the novel about the relationship. It was mostly like a comical novel, and it became very successful. But the
Mhm.
but the former one, the initial one, he could not finish it in many years. No? He was obsessed with writing this perfect piece because it was initially a book that he started writing down when he was in prison. As you know, here in Mexico, we had a authoritarian, um,
Like we in Russia, we
like in
can
Russia,
understand each
exactly.
other
No,
perfectly.
you understand perfectly. So the authoritarian age and era in Mexico uh, led many writers to go to jail. My father was
Mhm.
one of them, and he started writing this novel in the jail because a poet, a friend of him, she told him that he should try to write down his dreams because
Mhm.
eventually that would become a novel. So, well, to finalize, the man is in jail. He receives this command by her friend, this poet, to write down his dreams because a novel will be built. And uh, he spends like 20 years of his life trying to write down this perfect work of art. And of course, he went through several episodes of psychopathology.
And
But
crises, of course.
yeah, personal crises that were crises for the family as well. But also these crises and these emergent psychopathological states led to other creative works, right?
So that's absolutely fantastic. And I also was very curious, how is it happen that in a soul of an artist or just a creative artistic person, two absolutely polar states exist. The first one is a very well developed ego that moves you to create something, to express yourself, to share, and altogether very strong and tyrannic this self-criticism. But also this self-criticism moves you toward very high quality of your creations. But also this self-criticism can lead you to a psychiatric hospital. This is paradoxical, but this is, I think, common among creative person. Is it true?
I think it's right. I think it would be dishonest to deny all these narcissistic traits and drives that are in many writers, no, and other artists as well. But of course, as you said, it has a dark side, so to speak, no, but also a creative side, because through this desire for recognition and perfection, actually the writer or the artist manages or brings about a product that has a meaning beyond himself or herself, right? Something that is of value for others as well. So perhaps the drives are partly narcissistic, but paradoxically they contribute to a better interpersonal attunement. So that would be perhaps another paradox.
I agree with you. So now we ran out of time. I think I can talk with you endlessly, absolutely. And I'm looking forward to read your books in English or in Russian, how it will happen. Just to conclude, I wanted to ask you to name 3 things that would help creative people to keep balance between a healthy mental state and also this creative process, because you are both, you are neuropsychiatrist and you are a creator. I think you have a lot of things to share with others, how to create and be still sane, or at least seem to be sane, you know.
Yeah, myself, I would say that the first thing would be having an actual desire to understand and to care for your own body, right? Your bodily being, your corporeal being, because writers and many artists forget a lot about their own bodies. No, it's not the case of dancers, of course, or other people that use more their own bodies to create. But in the case of persons that use symbolic systems mostly, like writers, sometimes they forget about their physical health. And this is one of the most important enemies of creation. And I see it a lot, no, as a clinician, because sometimes writers or artists uh, want me to take care of their mental health, but the first thing that you discover is they have important problems of physical health as well, no? Because also there's this kind of romantic idea, no, that the genius must be locked in a room, no, almost without any light and without any human contact, connecting with the ghost, with the spirit, no. And unfortunately, this would be one recommendation. The second one would be to make a lot of physical activity. And there's a tradition of this in literature. No? Some thinkers, philosophers, writers have said in many ways that they create better by walking, no? or making other kinds of physical activity. Myself, I try to do some hiking, no? Mountain hiking, and also bicycle. No? So I think that movement no? Is one of the most important keys to start the process of creation. No? And it also aligns well with the purpose of keeping your physical health as well.
Your soul.
Exactly. And the third point would be, I would say, keeping a sense of openness to the others, no? To what the others want to say, to listen well, to read a lot other authors as well, to hear the music of others, because sometimes as creators we became self obsessed, no? And we we are not very well at listening to others, no? But for instance, a writer needs to be very skilled at listening, because otherwise they cannot uh, recreate the verbal thoughts and the verbal practices, no, surrounding ourselves. So I think that the third point would be to maintain a sense of openness towards others, with a sense of receptivity, not only creativity, but a sense of receptivity, and openness to others. That would be the third recommendation.
Thank you very much. I already love this episode.